Chapter 1. Crash. William Miller, towering and broad-shouldered, slammed the door open with a force that made the walls tremble. His eyes swept past me, scanning the room like a predator searching for prey. When he didn't see Emma, his frustration zeroed in on me, and I could feel the heat of his anger rising. The look in his eyes was as venomous as it had been in my previous life. Nothing had changed. Before I could react, William grabbed my chin, fingers digging painfully into my skin. "Where is she? Where's Emma?" In my last life, every time William unleashed his violent temper on Emma, she'd come to me, begging for a place to hide. And like an idiot, I gave her one. I thought I was protecting her, but all I did was make myself a target for William's rage. Whenever he couldn't find her, he'd tear my apartment apart, smashing everything in sight. One time, he even set the place on fire, nearly burning the entire building down. I told Emma to leave him to get a divorce. She acted like she agreed, but in reality, she just went back to him the moment he threw some expensive gift her way. And for all my advice for trying to get her out, William only grew to despise me more. Now, his grip tightened around my throat, lifting me off the ground. I could barely breathe, my feet kicking helplessly as I struggled. Then, without warning, he threw me to the floor like a rag doll. Pain shot through my body, but I didn't have time to focus on it. If I didn't move fast, I knew what would come next. William was strong. In my last life, he took my life, and I wasn't about to let that happen again. "I'm looking for her too," I managed to choke out, scrambling to my feet. "If you hadn't barged in, I was about to report her missing." William's eyes narrowed, clearly not buying a word of it. And honestly, I didn't blame him. In my previous life, I spent every waking moment covering for Emma, shielding her from his wrath. I even tried to make him let her go, convinced I could appeal to whatever humanity was left in him. But my attempts to reason with him only made things worse, until it led to my end. Chapter 2. I could see the disbelief in his eyes, so I quickly pulled out my phone. "Look, I even booked a ride to the police station before you showed up." As if on cue, my phone rang. The driver was calling to confirm the pickup. William's tense posture relaxed, if only slightly. He still looked at me with suspicion, but he seemed to believe me for now. I exhaled shakily and took a few steps back, putting some distance between us. Being near him made my skin crawl, my body instinctively recoiling from the memories of everything he'd put me through. The fear was real, but so was the anger. Anger at William for his cruelty, but also at Emma for dragging me into her mess. I hated William for his violence, but I hated Emma even more for her lies. Looking back, their entire relationship had been a train wreck from the start. From the day they met to the day they got married, barely 6 months had passed. When I first got her wedding invitation, I told her to think twice. I had seen what kind of man William was. Once, I watched him snap a cat's legs like it was nothing, tossing it into the trash without a second thought. He didn't leave until stray dogs had torn the poor thing apart. But Emma? She wouldn't hear a word against him. "Olivia, you're misunderstanding him," she'd say, her voice dripping with misplaced devotion. "He did it because I'm allergic to cats. He was just protecting me, that's all. Olivia, can't you be happy for me? I've finally found someone who loves me this much." She always looked so pitiful when she said it, as if I was the one trying to break them up, as if I couldn't understand their so-called love. Looking back now, it was obvious. Emma had been chasing wealth all along. William was her ticket to the life she'd always dreamed of, and she wasn't going to let go of him easily. In my past life, she played us both like pawns. She wanted to escape his abuse, sure, but she also wanted his money. And to get what she wanted, she had no problem dragging me into the crossfire. She set me up to take the fall, letting William's rage tear us both apart while she stood back, waiting to take whatever was left. But this time I wasn't going to let her get away with it. If Emma wanted to play games, I'd make sure she was stuck in this nightmare of a marriage for good. Before I could say any more, the door swung open again, and William's assistant rushed in. His eyes flicked over to me, his expression unreadable. "Sir," he said, addressing William formally, "we've tracked the location of Madam." He swallowed, hesitation clear in his voice. "It's showing she's here. In this house." Chapter 3. The assistant's simple statement sent my world spinning again. pushing me right back into danger. William's eyes narrowed, his gaze turning cold and dangerous as he sized me up. I stood frozen, watching as his men tore my place apart, rummaging through drawers and tossing aside furniture in search of Emma's phone. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. This hadn't happened the last life. In my previous life, things had unfolded differently. After William took my life, the police showed up almost immediately. There hadn't been any time for him to cover his tracks. They locked down the scene, caught him red-handed. The evidence was airtight, and there were witnesses. His trial had been swift, the verdict inevitable. But how did the police show up so precisely on time? "Sir, we found it." One of the men yanked Emma's phone out from under the couch. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. Even from across the room, there was no mistaking it. It was hers. The 6 oversized diamonds on the case were a giveaway. Gaudy and attention-seeking, just like Emma. I had no idea when she'd hidden it here, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't an accident. Emma had planned this, laying a trap just in case William didn't finish me off quickly enough. She'd left this bomb ticking, waiting for the right moment to detonate it. And sure enough, as soon as William laid eyes on the phone, his temper flared. He turned on me, his foot swinging toward me with brutal force, but the pain never came. I opened my eyes to see James standing between us, his hand wrapped firmly around William's ankle. With one swift, effortless move, James flipped him onto the floor. William hit the ground hard, his face contorted in pain. For a split second, I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. It wasn't often you saw William on the losing end of anything. Chapter 4. "Olivia, are you okay?" James asked, his voice full of concern as he glanced over at me. "I'm sorry I didn't get here sooner. I came as fast as I could after you texted, but I was stuck in a meeting." He shot a quick look at William, who was still groaning on the floor, before turning back to me, his eyes scanning for signs of injury. I shook my head, trying to reassure him. "No, you got here just in time. If anyone should be apologizing, it's me," I added, my voice shaking with guilt. I couldn't even look him in the eye. In my past life, James had warned me over and over again to keep my distance from Emma, but I'd never listened. I'd even fought with him when he tried to take Emma back to William's house after one of her many escapes, calling him heartless for not doing more to help. James had always been patient, kind, more than I deserved. Every argument we'd ever had been because of Emma. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm not mad at you," James said, pulling me into a tight embrace. "You have no idea how hard this past month has been." "I know," I whispered, feeling the weight of my mistakes. "I should have trusted you. It's my fault." We'd barely spoken in the month since we called off our wedding, and it had all started with Emma. I'd asked her to be my maid of honor, thinking I was doing her a favor. She'd accepted, smiling sweetly, but on the day of the wedding, she was nowhere to be found. Her phone kept going straight to voicemail, and I had no choice but to ask a friend to step in at the last minute. But midway through the ceremony, Emma had burst through the doors, disheveled and covered in bruises, sobbing uncontrollably. "Olivia, please, you have to help me. He's going to murder me," she'd cried, throwing herself into my arms. William had stormed in right after her, his face twisted with rage. I had been torn, my heart breaking for Emma. I'd begged James to step in to protect her. After all, James was a champion in martial arts. If anyone could handle William, it was him. But James had refused, his voice calm but firm. "Olivia, we should call the police," he'd said. Emma had immediately panicked. "No, the police won't help. They'll just call it a family issue. And when we get home, he'll only hurt me worse." She'd clung to James, her hands trembling, her face a picture of terror. Chapter 5. Back then, all I could think about was standing up for Emma. I was so focused on defending her that I completely missed the subtle things she was doing, the little manipulations, the way she pressed herself against James. I barely noticed that her whole body was practically glued to him. Meanwhile, William was tearing my wedding apart, scaring off the guests and turning the day into a total disaster. James, ever the protector, finally broke free of Emma's grip and tried to shield me from the chaos, wrapping his arms around me. But instead of being grateful, I shoved him away. "James, I can't believe you're acting like this," I yelled, my voice full of frustration and disappointment. Are you really so scared of getting involved that you won't even help my best friend? James looked at me, stunned, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Is that really what you think of me, Olivia? For a moment, the tension between us was palpable, so thick it was hard to breathe. And of course, Emma, always the master manipulator, seized the opportunity. Olivia, it's fine, really, she said, her voice full of fake concern. This is your big day. Don't ruin it just because of me. James shot her a cold, disbelieving look, as if he was trying to snap me out of the spell she'd cast over me. You're really going to side with her again? He asked, his voice low but full of hurt. But I was too far gone. I grabbed Emma by the arm and stood by her side, nodding. James's face fell, the pain in his eyes unmistakable. He turned and walked away, his steps heavy with disappointment. But before he left, he made sure William wouldn't hurt me. He knocked him flat with one clean, powerful punch, leaving him groaning on the floor. That was the last time we spoke. After that, James and I stopped talking, both of us too stubborn to apologize. We let the silence stretch between us, and by the time my previous life came to an end, we still hadn't made up. Chapter 6. William wasn't done, though. He dragged himself off the floor and came at me again, swinging a punch before I could even react. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze, completely paralyzed by fear. But James was faster. In a split second, he shoved me aside and spun around, kicking William square in the gut. The impact was brutal, and William crumpled to the ground, gasping for air, his face twisted in agony. What are you all waiting for? William wheezed, glaring at his remaining lackeys. Do I have to do everything myself? The few men still standing around exchanged nervous glances. They'd seen what James could do, and none of them were eager to jump in. One or two of them threw half-hearted punches in James's direction, but they clearly had no intention of actually getting involved. James barely spared them a glance before barking. Get out. They didn't need to be told twice. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving William writhing in pain on the floor. Even then, William wasn't ready to give up. Olivia, he growled, his voice rough and full of venom. Don't think that just because you've found someone to protect you, I'll let you off the hook. Emma has always been good to you, and this is how you repay her? I'll make you pay for hurting her. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Good to me? I asked, stepping closer, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you think? I crouched down next to him, looking him straight in the eyes. Emma's version of being good meant isolating me from everyone who cared about me. One by one, she pushed them all away. It had happened more times than I could count. Friends I'd known for years suddenly stopped talking to me. Either they ghosted me, or we had some unexplained falling out. Even her own friends couldn't stand me. The only time Emma ever came looking for me was when she needed a scapegoat or someone to fight her battles. For years, I told myself it didn't matter. I thought as long as she was happy, that's all that counted. Friends didn't have to be around all the time, right? So I'd sit there, watching her post photos of fancy dinners and trips with her other friends, and I'd like every single one, adding comments like, have fun, or, you deserve it. And when her friends called me names behind my back, pathetic, I stayed quiet, not wanting to make things awkward for her. I swallowed every insult, every slight, all to keep the peace. Chapter 7. And what did I get for all my endless compromises? Emma exploited every single one. She systematically drove away anyone who genuinely cared about me, trapping me in her carefully crafted prison. She used me until there was nothing left, and when I was no longer of value, she tossed me aside like I was disposable. I had never truly reflected on my relationship with her until now. The realization hit me hard, so hard that I couldn't stop shaking with anger. James, noticing my distress, immediately stepped in to calm me down. Olivia, it's over now, he said softly, his voice steady. From now on, no matter what happens, I'll be right here with you. I turned to him, gratitude swelling in my chest. Through everything, he had chosen me, standing by my side when I needed him the most. Taking a deep breath, I regained my composure and refocused on William. It was time to get back to the matter at hand. Emma's only been missing for a short time. Why are you acting like she's already met some terrible fate? That was the part that had puzzled me from the moment I woke up in this second chance at life. Sure, William was impulsive and erratic, But in my previous life, Emma had simply vanished. No body, no trace. So why hadn't William been more desperate to find her back then? Why had he come after me with such viciousness instead? Still caught up in my earlier accusations, William answered almost automatically, not fully processing the shift in conversation. She sent me a text before she disappeared. A text? I repeated, narrowing my eyes. I grabbed his phone from his hands without hesitation. Holding it up to his face to unlock it, I quickly scrolled through the messages until I found what I was looking for. There it was. William, Olivia said that if I don't leave you this time, she'll go to the media. I don't want to lose you, and I certainly don't want to lose my best friend. I'm so torn, I don't know what to do. Please don't confront her. Olivia's been acting so unstable lately, and to be honest, I'm a little afraid of her myself. By the time I finished reading, I could feel the heat rising in my chest. William, now emboldened by the message, glared at me with renewed fury. After she sent that text, she went completely off the grid. Her phone's been out of power ever since. I've looked everywhere, and there's no sign of her. His voice was rising with each word. And now I find her phone in your house, and you have the nerve to claim you haven't seen her? You're lying. Just tell me what you've done with Emma. Before I could react, William lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. Chapter 8. But James was faster. With lightning reflexes, he landed a solid kick to William's ribs, sending him flying backward. William crashed to the ground, gasping for air while I stood frozen, staring at the phone in my hand. And then, unexpectedly, I began to laugh. It wasn't a polite laugh. It was the kind of bitter, uncontrollable laughter that bubbles up when you realize just how twisted things have become. I had only ever read about people like Emma, the kind of person who could turn every situation to their advantage, twisting facts and manipulating everyone around them. And now I realized I had been living with one all along. Emma had outplayed me in a way I never saw coming. I had mentioned going to the media, but that was back when she was covered in bruises, after William had beaten her so badly she could barely stand. I had urged her to get a divorce, even offered to help by exposing William's abuse to the press, thinking public pressure would force him to let her go. I never imagined that my offer to help would be turned into something so sinister. What I had said in an effort to protect her, to give her a way out, had somehow been twisted into a narrative where I was the villain trying to destroy her marriage. I had spent 10 years being her friend, and this was how she repaid me, by stabbing me in the back. I thought back to what had happened after my end in my previous life. Emma had held a press conference, hiding behind large sunglasses, her voice trembling with emotion as she spoke to the reporters. I've known about them for a while, she'd said, her words carefully chosen to play the victim. William made a mistake, but he loves me. Olivia kept pressuring me to divorce him, and then she kidnapped me. William only took her life because he was trying to protect me, she had said, her voice barely above a whisper. The media had eaten it up. Emma's carefully crafted story, along with the text messages she had sent William before she disappeared, painted me as the villain, a desperate homewrecker who had pushed her too far and driven William to murder. No one had questioned her version of events. No one had defended me. In the end, William had been executed for his crime, and Emma? She had inherited the entire Miller family fortune, just like she'd always wanted. Chapter 9. What an elaborate game she's been playing. I glanced over at James, my mind racing. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Pushing James away had probably been part of Emma's plan all along. She knew that if I married him, no matter how much William lost control, he'd never be able to hurt me. James wasn't just any man. He was a champion fighter. It sent a shiver down my spine. Emma had thought of everything, planned every move with such precision. But thank God I had been given a second chance. I tossed the phone back to William, my resolve hardening. Well, Emma, you like to play games, don't you? You love pulling the strings, making sure everyone dances to your tune. But let's see how you handle it when your clever little schemes start falling apart. You want to know where Emma is? I asked, my voice cold. William hesitated, his expression shifting. For once, he didn't rush to shout or argue. You know where she is? Why didn't you tell me sooner? I smirked. I'd only just pieced it together myself. In my previous life, William had been arrested right after he took my life. But how had the police arrived so quickly? How could anyone have known that he would snap and murder me at that exact moment? Unless, of course, someone had been watching. Someone who knew exactly what was going to happen. And who stood to gain from all this? Only Emma. She had to be nearby, keeping a close eye on everything, waiting for the right moment when William would lose control and I'd meet my end. But this time, her perfect little plan wasn't going to work. Chapter 10. We headed straight to the hotel across the street from my apartment. It was the only place where someone could have watched my room so closely, where they could see everything that had been going on. At first, the hotel receptionist wasn't keen on giving us any information about the guests. But all it took was William pulling out a photo of him and Emma together. The staff quickly caved and gave us the room number. Armed with the room key, William immediately made for the elevator, practically vibrating with impatience. But I held him back. "She'll come down soon enough," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We'll wait here." If Emma had been spying on my apartment, she'd know we were coming. If we rushed upstairs now, we'd likely miss her trying to make a quick exit. It made more sense to stay put and catch her in the act. Surprisingly, William didn't argue. His earlier rage seemed to have fizzled out, leaving him looking drained and defeated. For a moment, I wondered what was going on in his head, but now wasn't the time to dwell on it. 2 minutes later, the elevator door slid open, and a woman stepped out, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat, and a mask. She was trying hard to stay anonymous, but I knew exactly who it was. As she walked past, I casually stuck out my foot, sending her sprawling to the floor. Her hat, glasses, and mask tumbled off as she landed, leaving her completely exposed. Who else could it be but Emma? William shot me a furious look, rushing to help her up. "Emma, what are you doing here?" I crossed my arms, watching her with cold detachment. I wanted to see how she was going to spin this, how she'd twist the truth to make herself the victim once again. Emma scrambled to her feet, looking as innocent as ever. "I just needed some space to think," she said softly, her voice trembling with all too familiar vulnerability. And just like always, she turned to me with wide, imploring eyes. "Olivia, you know me better than anyone." I nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. "Oh, I know you, all right." I had spent years running interference for her, covering for her every time William beat her. She would disappear for days, leaving me to clean up the mess, to lie on her behalf. But this time was different. This time, I had brought William straight to her doorstep. Chapter 11. I stepped aside and stood next to James. Emma's expression faltered, and she awkwardly withdrew her hand. Her eyes widened in surprise when she finally noticed James, as if seeing him for the first time. "Brother Hui, have you and Olivia made up?" As usual, James ignored her, leaving Emma to face a closed door. She turned back to me, trying to regain her composure. "Olivia, I hope I didn't cause you any trouble this time?" "Of course not. How could you ever cause me trouble?" I replied with a saccharine smile. "But this time, you certainly worried your husband sick." "Emma, you're married now. You can't keep acting so recklessly. It's normal for couples to have their squabbles, but you can't just disappear without a word like this." Emma probably still thought I would take her side and criticize William, worsening the rift between them. This was the first time I had ever defended William in front of her. She scrutinized me for a long time, as if trying to see through me. But she could never guess that the old Olivia was gone. I watched them leave, my emotions turbulent. Now wasn't the time to burn bridges. I needed to learn from Emma's playbook, acting oblivious while slowly dismantling her foundation piece by piece. I would ensure she never had the chance to rise again. "Olivia, you seem different this time," James observed, both pleased and anxious about my transformation. He was glad I had finally seen Emma for who she truly was. But my sudden change also made him uneasy. People don't change their nature without experiencing significant life events. "I'm a bit worried about you." I looked up and gently kissed the corner of his mouth. "Don't worry this time. I'll make sure to hold on to my happiness." James smiled, reassured by my words. He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. With him by my side, I felt a renewed sense of strength and determination. I would expose Emma's true nature and reclaim the life and happiness that had been stolen from me. As we walked away from the hotel, I felt a sense of closure for the first time in a long while. The past was behind me, and with James's unwavering support, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This was my second chance, and I wouldn't let it slip through my fingers. Chapter 12. During the National Day holiday, I went back to my hometown with James, and we had our wedding ceremony again. Previously, to accommodate Emma, my best friend, James and I had planned our wedding in the city where we worked. His parents were very displeased with this. It took considerable effort from James to mediate and persuade his parents. Unfortunately, that carefully planned wedding was ruined by Emma's antics. On the day of the wedding, my mother, who had always been my rock, held me close, crying tears of joy. Her lifelong wish was to see me marry a man who loved me and to witness me walking down the aisle. Sadly, in my past life, after my fallout with James, I was murdered by William, and her wish never came true. Later, with Emma's manipulation of public opinion, my mother was subjected to much gossip and scandal in our community, and she passed away in her early 50s. "Olivia, didn't you invite Emma to the wedding this time?" my mother asked. I shook my head. She said she was too busy to come. In reality, I hadn't told Emma about my wedding at all. Since our last encounter, I hadn't reached out to her. I returned the rented apartment and moved in with James. Emma called me a few times, but I deliberately ignored her calls. Eventually, she stopped trying to contact me. The wedding without Emma was a great success. After the holiday, James and I returned to the city. As soon as we entered the residential area, we were intercepted by Emma, who was waiting at the security booth. She was up to her old tricks, sporting visible injuries and lamenting to the security guard for over half an hour. The guard, moved by her tale of woe, clenched his fists, ready to seek justice for her. Emma seemed to revel in sharing her misfortunes with anyone who would listen. "Brother Hui, Olivia, you're finally back." Seeing us, Emma acted as if nothing had ever happened between us. "Why didn't you tell me about your wedding?" "And Olivia, I've been calling you, but no one ever answered." I responded casually. "We were in the countryside. The signal was probably bad. Is there something you need?" Emma's face twitched slightly at my indifferent tone, but she quickly recovered. "It's just that I've been having such a hard time. I thought you could help me like you used to." I glanced at James, who looked back at me with a mixture of concern and resolve. "Emma, we have our own lives now," I said firmly. "You need to start solving your own problems." Her eyes widened in surprise, clearly not expecting my firm stance. "But Olivia, you always said you'd be there for me," she pleaded. "That was before," I replied. "Things have changed." "I've changed. You need to move on too." Emma's expression hardened as she realized that her usual tactics wouldn't work on me anymore. "I see," she said quietly. "Well, if you ever change your mind." But I knew there was no turning back. This was my new life, and I intended to protect it fiercely. James squeezed my hand reassuringly, and we walked past Emma, leaving her standing there, a shadow of our past. As we entered our home, I felt a sense of peace and closure. The future was ours to build, free from the manipulations and toxicity that had once clouded our lives. Together, James and I would face whatever challenges came our way, stronger and more united than ever. Chapter 13. Emma looked nervously at James. "Brother Hui, can I ask you for a favor this time?" I glanced at James in confusion, and he returned my puzzled look. No one spoke. Emma didn't seem embarrassed. She pushed past me, crashing straight into James's chest, her tears flowing freely. "Brother Hui, I know you've had many misunderstandings about me in the past, but I really do consider you and Olivia as my friends." James impatiently pried her fingers off his arm and pushed her to the ground. "I'm not familiar with you. Please don't appear in front of Olivia and me again." Before he could finish, Emma clung to him again. "Brother Hui, I'm really not as bad as you think." This time she held on even tighter. Although James knew some martial arts, Emma was a woman, and he didn't want to use too much force and risk hurting her. He looked at me for help, but I stood by, not intending to intervene. I was waiting. Emma's behavior today was indeed unusual. While she had always been shameless, she had never been this blatant. When something seems off, there's usually a reason behind it. Sure enough, before I could piece together what was happening, a dark figure darted quickly past me. I turned just in time to see William charging towards James, a crazed look in his eyes. "Get away from her," he roared, his fist aimed squarely at James. James, still entangled with Emma, couldn't react in time. But I could. I stepped forward, blocking William's path and catching his fist with both hands. The impact was jarring, but I held firm. "Enough!" I shouted. "This ends now." William's eyes widened in shock, his rage momentarily halted by my unexpected interference. Emma took advantage of the distraction to pull away from James, her eyes darting between us, calculating her next move. "This has gone on long enough," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Emma, William, your games are over. We won't be your pawns anymore." James, now free from Emma's grasp, moved to stand beside me, his presence a comforting shield. "You need to leave," he told them, his tone brooking no argument. "And don't come back." Emma's face twisted with anger and frustration, but she knew she had lost this round. "Fine," she spat, her voice venomous. "But this isn't over." William, still seething, took a step back, his eyes locked on mine with a promise of retribution. But I stood my ground, unflinching. "Yes, it is," I replied firmly. "It's over." With that, Emma and William finally left, their departure heavy with unspoken threats. I turned to James, who looked at me with a mixture of pride and concern. "We did the right thing," he said softly, pulling me into a comforting embrace. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief and closure wash over me. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. Together, James and I walked back to our apartment, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that we had each other's backs. Chapter 14. Before I could react, the dark figure lunged at the two struggling individuals, knocking them both to the ground. I gasped and rushed over to help James. It was then that I realized the dark figure was William. In the confusion, he punched James, sending both of us sprawling onto the grass. I twisted my ankle and struggled to stand up. James helped me to a nearby stone bench, preparing to check my injury. But William wasn't done. This time, James didn't hold back. With a swift move, he performed an over-the-shoulder throw, slamming William into the ground with a resounding impact. I heard the sickening crack of bones breaking. "James, you have a wife, yet you covet someone else's. You're shameless." William spat, struggling to get up. He looked like he wanted to come at us again but hesitated, intimidated by James's stance. Suddenly, Emma dropped to her knees, sobbing dramatically. "Husband, this isn't my fault." He kept holding on to me, saying he felt sorry for me and wanted to help. He wouldn't let me go. "I just wanted to see Olivia." As Emma continued her tearful complaints, William's face grew darker and darker. Then, his gaze fell on the grass where the struggle had taken place. Following his line of sight, I saw several photographs scattered on the ground, all candid shots. The photos showed James and Emma in compromising positions, their gestures intimate, even one showing them in bed together. My mind went blank. James stepped in front of me, trying to shield me from the sight. "Olivia, these aren't real." I felt my heart sink, but I couldn't let myself be swayed by what seemed like obvious manipulation. "James, I need to know the truth," I said, my voice trembling but firm. He looked at me, pain and determination in his eyes. "I promise you, I have never been involved with Emma. These photos are fabricated." Emma's sobs grew louder. "How can you say that? These photos clearly show everything. You're just trying to cover it up." William glared at James. "You think you can lie your way out of this? You're disgusting." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Emma, you've manipulated and lied enough. I won't fall for your tricks anymore." Emma's expression flickered with panic. "Olivia, you have to believe me. He's been lying to you." But I had had enough. "No, Emma. The only one lying here is you." James reached out and gently held my hand. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Olivia. Together. We would have the photos analyzed, exposing any alterations." It was time to end Emma's deceit once and for all. William, still seething with anger, seemed ready to fight again, but James's unwavering stance kept him at bay. This battle wasn't over, but with James by my side, I knew we could face whatever came next. It was time to bring the truth to light and put an end to the manipulations that had plagued our lives. Chapter 15. Before James could finish his sentence, William attacked again. This time, fueled by the anger from the photos, James was also incensed. Having competed in international martial arts tournaments for years, he struck with precision and force, aiming for William's vital spots. I watched in horror, glancing at Emma. She looked back at me with a sinister smile, her earlier pitiful demeanor completely gone. She had deliberately tangled with James to plant those photos on him, intending to provoke the hidden William. It was a cunning move, killing two birds with one stone. Such a malicious mind. William, already unable to defend himself, was now on the receiving end of a relentless beating. But James showed no signs of stopping. "James, stop!" I shouted. Emma intended to use the same tactic she had once used on me against James. She wanted to get rid of William using James's hands, but James, blinded by rage, wasn't listening. His sense of justice had been deeply affronted, and he was channeling all his fury into this moment. I couldn't let him lose control like this. I tried to move forward to stop him, but Emma blocked my path, holding me tightly. She continued to fan the flames. "Olivia, I really didn't mean for this to happen. It's all James's fault. He forced me." Her words enraged William, who found a sudden surge of energy and sprang back to his feet. The two men resumed their brawl. I tried to intervene, but Emma wouldn't let me. Just as the situation seemed to spiral completely out of control, several men in black appeared out of nowhere. They swiftly separated William and James. The black-clad men efficiently restrained both of them, preventing any further violence. "What's going on here?" one of the men demanded, his tone authoritative. Before anyone could respond, another man stepped forward, producing a badge. "We're with the police. We've been monitoring the situation." Emma's face paled, and she tried to back away, but one of the officers grabbed her arm. "You're not going anywhere," he said sternly. "We've been watching you for a while. Your manipulations end here." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The law had finally caught up to Emma's deceit. One of the officers approached me and James. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer. I nodded, still shaken. "Thank you. We couldn't have handled this alone. We've been investigating Emma for some time," the officer explained. "Her web of lies and manipulations is extensive. You're not the first victims, but hopefully you'll be the last." As the officers led Emma, William, and James away for statements, I felt a sense of justice being served. Emma's reign of deception was finally over. Standing alone for a moment, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past start to lift. James returned shortly after, his face bruised but determined. He pulled me into a tight embrace. "We did it, Olivia," he whispered. "We finally broke free." I nodded, tears of relief streaming down my face. Yes, we did. Together, we would face the future without the shadows of deception and manipulation hanging over us. This was the start of a new chapter, one where we could build our lives on truth and trust. Chapter 16. William struggled, still wanting to fight, but the men in black held him firmly, leaving him powerless. Emma stood in shock, staring at the strangers who had appeared out of nowhere. I quickly pushed her away and rushed to James's side. Thankfully, he only had a few scratches on his face. "Did you hit my son just now?" A woman's voice suddenly cut through the air. Before I could see who it was, a sharp slap landed on James's face. I turned, ready to speak, but before I could, the woman raised her hand for another slap. This time I caught her wrist firmly. "Mrs. Lee, my husband did hit your son, but only because he attacked first." Lee Sinew scoffed, shaking off my grip. "So you're the one who called me?" I nodded, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yes, I called you here to show you what kind of person your daughter-in-law really is, not to scold my husband." Mrs. Lee glanced dismissively at Emma. "So what scandalous secrets do you have for me today?" The moment Emma recognized Lee Sinew, she froze in fear. When she finally tried to slip away, her path was blocked by the men in black. Seeing Lee Sinew, Emma looked like a mouse facing a cat, desperately wishing she could bury her head in the ground. I was right. Emma was terrified of Lee Sinew. In my previous life, after William was arrested, the case was resolved in less than a day. Partly because Emma's plan was so meticulously executed, with each step following the next perfectly. But another crucial reason was that Lee Sinew was not in the country at the time. By the time she received the news and rushed back, everything had already been settled, and it was too late to change anything. This gave Emma the opportunity to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Now, with Lee Sin-yu here, Emma's schemes were finally coming to light. "Mrs. Lee," I began, "your son and his wife have both caused a lot of trouble, but Emma has been playing both sides, manipulating everyone for her benefit." Lee Sin-yu's eyes narrowed as she looked at Emma, who was now trembling. "Is this true, Emma?" she demanded. Emma stammered. I don't know what she's talking about. It's all lies." But her fear was palpable. "Enough," Lee Sin-yu said coldly. "I've had enough of your lies. It's time for the truth." The men in black brought out the photographs that Emma had planted on James, laying them out for everyone to see. "These photos were meant to frame James," I explained. "Emma was trying to drive a wedge between us and use William to do her dirty work." Lee Sin-yu studied the photos, her expression growing darker. "Emma, you've crossed the line too many times. It's over." Emma fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Mrs. Lee, forgive me. I didn't mean any harm." But Lee Sin-yu was unmoved. "Take her away," she ordered the men in black. "She'll face the consequences of her actions." As Emma was led away, I felt a sense of justice being served. Her reign of manipulation and deceit was finally over. Turning to James, I saw relief in his eyes. We had weathered the storm together. "It's done, Olivia," he said softly. "We can finally move on." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. With Lee Sin-yu's intervention, the cycle of deceit had been broken. Together, James and I walked away, ready to build our future free from the shadows of the past. Chapter 17. "Mrs. Lee, haven't you noticed that your son's temper has become increasingly volatile since his marriage?" Lee Sin-yu stared at me for a moment, analyzing the implications of my words. "Are you suggesting that my son's changes are related to this woman?" she asked, gesturing toward Emma. "I can't be 100% certain, but I'm about 90% sure. It's easy to confirm. Take William to the hospital for a blood test and a full body examination, and the truth will come out." Since noticing the unusual behavior in William, I had consulted some of my friends in the medical field while back from my wedding. Although aggression and violent tendencies can be symptoms of XYY syndrome, also known as the supermale syndrome, they are not definitive indicators of the condition. Because of the preconceived notions instilled in me by Emma, I had always believed William was an XYY syndrome patient. This made me overly cautious around him, successfully allowing Emma to manipulate me like a pawn. Lee Sin-yu motioned for the men in black to take the severely injured William to the hospital. She then approached Emma, grabbing her hair and pressing her face into the ground. Emma's face contorted in pain as her cheek was buried in the grass. Lee Sin-yu raised one leg, her deep red high heel digging into Emma's face. "Didn't I warn you not to involve Chung Rue in your schemes? Did you think my words were just noise?" Despite being pinned down, Emma started to laugh maniacally. "So what if you did? You wouldn't let me bear the Miller family's child, wouldn't share the company stocks with me, and made me sign a prenuptial agreement before the marriage. Do you think you ever treated me as a daughter-in-law? You just wanted to use me until your son got bored and then kick me out. Well, I refuse. Do you know what your son has been eating every day?" "Haha, Lee Sin-yu. This is your retribution." Lee Sin-yu's anger turned into a cold laugh. She yanked Emma by the hair and dragged her towards the car. I saw blood trickling from Emma's mouth. She seemed like she wanted to say something to me, but the car door slammed shut before she could speak. That was the last time I saw Emma. For many years after, I never saw her again. But the Miller family always maintained publicly that Emma was still the young mistress of the Miller family. "Emma, is this the prosperous future you envisioned?" Despite the chaos and the manipulation, I felt a sense of closure. Emma's treachery had finally caught up with her, and justice, in its own way, had been served. I turned to James, who had been watching the entire scene unfold. He took my hand and we walked away from the turmoil, ready to embrace a future free from the shadows of deceit and lies. As we moved forward, I knew that with James by my side, we could face anything. Together, we would build a life grounded in truth and filled with genuine happiness. Chapter 17. Epilogue 1. My name is Emma. I met Olivia in our first year of high school. She was outstanding. Not only did the teachers and students like her, but even the boy I had a crush on liked her. Her only flaw, perhaps, was her cold personality. To get close to her, I spent all my remaining pocket money every day to buy her milk. After a month, she finally walked over and spoke to me for the first time. She said she never drank that brand of milk. I will never forget the tone of her voice. It was as if she were bestowing a favor upon me. It was as if she was saying, "Don't try to flatter me with what you think is precious. To me, it's just trash." I smiled and said it was okay. Olivia didn't understand why I was smiling. She continued, "I threw away all the milk you bought." I kept smiling. "It's okay. What kind of milk do you like? I'll buy it for you next time." Eventually, I didn't have to spend my money on milk anymore, because I would tell the boys who liked her that if they bought that brand of milk, I would deliver their love letters to Olivia. Those boys, unlike my poor family, could afford to buy her favorite milk, often buying dozens of bottles at a time. I would give one bottle to Olivia and keep the rest for myself. Her backpack filled with love letters, but none of them were from the boy I had a crush on, because I kept his letters in my own bag, pretending that he was secretly in love with me. But Olivia was too proud. She never realized how precious it was to be liked by others. One day, she threw all the letters into a bonfire. Watching the flames leap up felt like watching countless versions of myself being roasted alive. I reached out to save the letters. Olivia pushed me away, calling me a lunatic. I wasn't crazy. She was the one who was crazy. Epilogue 2. Over the years, I have tightly bound myself to Olivia. Wherever she went, I went. I witnessed her despair when she failed her high school exams. I also saw her loneliness when she was isolated in university. She didn't seem as exceptional as she had been in high school. No one wanted to revolve around her anymore. I finally could flaunt the love letters I received in front of her, but she didn't seem to care at all. I thought that such a proud person must think those people weren't good enough for her, so she showed no interest. Later, I desperately wanted to find a rich boyfriend. Maybe then she would say, "Emma, I'm so envious of you." But when I brought William to her and told her I was about to marry into a wealthy family, she poured cold water over my excitement. She said William wasn't a good match and advised me to reconsider. I was furious. Why couldn't she just wish me well? In a fit of anger, I married William in a flash. But after the wedding, I discovered that William was a domestic abuser, and his mother was no less of a nightmare. It felt like the whole world was against me. And just then, Olivia announced she was getting married. To an international Sonda champion, no less. She was still the same, always trying to show off. Epilogue 3. Today marks the 705th day of my imprisonment by Lee Sinew. William died last year. Those drugs had long since ravaged his body. The moment I heard of his death, I was overjoyed. That day, alone in the dark, damp basement, I sang good days all day long, until my throat was hoarse, until tears streamed down my face. I thought of Olivia. I wondered if she was still doing well, if she was still living as proudly as ever. But I would never know, because I would never see her again.